Yokoso owashitare. Welcome back to the 7th and the final mythic tale from the Ghost of Tsushima, where we are here explaining the classical Japanese that shows up there and telling you how it works so you can appreciate it a little bit better and understand just how amazing this game actually is, because they pulled out all the stops when writing these stories. These are actually fantastic, and I'm going to help you understand why. So, if you're new here, please see the previous videos to get a better idea of what we do. Essentially, we're just explaining the classical Japanese that occurs in these videos. So without further ado, let's just get into the actual video and the actual tale. Okay, so mythic tale number 7. I believe it's called the Undying Flame, but let's just get into it. Let's waste no more time. Oh, easy. So aru is from the root verb ari, which means to exist, to be. However, instead of being in the ari form, which is the ending form, so that's the form that would come at the end of a sentence that denotes that a sentence is done, it is in the adu form, and the adu form is what's called an attributive form. This is very important in that what you do for the attributive verbs is you put them before a noun, and then that verb describes the noun. So this aru is describing the toshi that comes next, and toshi means year. So aru comes from ari, which means to exist. So aru toshi means the year that exists, okay? Which essentially, in this context, the best way to translate it is 1 year, some year. So we don't know exactly when, it's just saying 1 year that existed, that exists. And then we have this particle ni. Ni is a very important particle if you're studying Japanese classical or modern Japanese. Ni is kind of like the place marker particle. It denotes place, sometimes direction, but usually place. So the best way to translate it is either at, in, on, by, something to that effect. So in this case, aru toshi ni means that in or at a year. Some year, okay? Moving on. Okay. What did they say? Honora? But anyway, so this first kanji, hono, means flames. Now, if you notice, it's written by using the kanji for fire, but twice. So it's not just like a little itty bitty fire. It's like lots of fire, okay? So flames. So honora. And then we have this second kanji, ten, which means heaven. So it means like the sky, the above. And these are both nouns, so honora, meaning that this is the honora is the subject of the sentence. So the honora is what we're talking about. So everything that comes after this, for this whole sentence, is in relation to the flames, the honora. And we have ten, means heaven, kara. And then kara is a particle that means from. It denotes a place of origin that it comes away from that. So, heaven from, and in order to translate it into English, one of the helpful things is to flip the words around. So this says heaven from, but how we would say it in English is from heaven. So flames from heaven, jogaku. Jogaku? Is that how you say this? I think that's what it's called. Jogaku. So this is the name of the mountain in Ghost of Tsushima where you go and you get the mythic tale, or rather you get the reward for this mythic tale. Jogaku, so is the name of the mountain. And then no, how do I want to describe this no? So this no, the best way I can describe it in English or translate it in English is of. However, when we say something in English with the term of, so if we say the hero of time, again, let's do the Zelda reference. The hero of time. In Japanese, hero would be eiyu, and then time would be toki, okay? So in English, we say the hero of time. But in Japanese, they would say the toki no eiyu, or the time of hero. So that's how they do it here. So the Jogaku no Yama, so the mountain of Jogaku, okay? Because Yama means mountain. And then we have another no. So we have the Jogaku no Yama, meaning the mountain of Jogaku, or Mount Jogaku, no, which again means of, and then mine is this kanji right here. Mine means the summit, the peak of the mountain. So the peak of the mountain of Jogaku. And then we have this ni again, which means at or in or on. In this case, I think the best way to translate it would be at. So at the peak of the mountain of Jogaku. And then we have this zo that follows the ni. Now, zo is an emphatic particle. So it doesn't really have a use or a function in and of itself, kind of like a lot of the other particles do. It just means like focusing on this, like, oh, wow, this is crazy. You see that in modern Japanese, how a very masculine way of ending a sentence would be to put zo at the end of it, because it's an emphatic thing that's kind of left over from this time period when it wasn't necessarily masculine, it was just emphatic. So, ni, zo. And then we have this verb, ochi, or actually this whole word is ochikeru, okay? Comes from the root verb otsu, which means to fall. However, we take it from otsu to ochi, so then we can add this keru onto it, the root form of it, which is, or the ending form, which is keri. But the reason why we want this keru / keri on there, even though it's in keru, is because keri is a past tense. You stick it on the end of a verb and it turns it past tense, but it turns it into a past tense recollective and makes it very poetic. So it's kind of like, like I'm remembering something. Oh man, back in those days, that was quite something. That was amazing. It's kind of what it means. However, normally it would end in keri, and then that would be the end of the sentence. However, we have it in keru because, like the aru that we had previously, we're putting it in the attributive form, meaning that we're going to describe a noun that comes after it. However, if you've watched the previous videos, you are very aware of this. If you notice, there is no noun after keru, because the noun is implied. In this instance, it's probably toki, which means time or time period. And time, when you have toki, the best way to translate that most of the time is actually to translate it into English as when. So when something happens. So in this case, we have ochi, which means to fall, keru, past tense, and then the implied toki, when. So when something, when this whole previous clause fell. And what fell? The flames from heaven. So to translate this whole thing, so when the flames from heaven fell, when the flames from heaven fell on Mount Jogaku, on the summit of Mount Jogaku. Okay, moving on. Okay, yuyushiki. Okay, yuyushiki comes from the root adjective yuyushi. Yuyushi means, this one's a little bit, it's not difficult per se, but yuyushi means like scary almost, or foreboding, a little bit unusual or unnerving. You can often see it used in terms of like describing ghosts or a little bit freaky situations. However, it's not just used for scary things. A lot of times, in this instance, what it's actually being used for is to denote this warrior that we'll get into. But it's to denote this warrior who's like awe-inspiring, who makes you go, oh my gosh, did you see that guy? He's crazy. Kind of like how we use the term crazy. Is crazy doesn't just mean like insanity. It can oftentimes be used in a very positive way. So yuyushi is the same thing. However, yuyushi is the ending form. It's the final form, which means that that's how you would end a sentence. If you wanted to end a sentence with yuyushi, you would end it, like, say, such and such. You would want to say, the warrior is yuyushi, and that's how you would end the sentence, okay? However, we are putting it in the attributive form, so we're sticking this ki on the end. So instead of yuyushi, we have yuyushi ki, because we are describing a noun, and the noun that comes after it is mono no fu. Now, if any of you guys are familiar with kanji, you'll notice that these two kanji characters together are bushi, as in bushido. Bu means like warrior or martial, and shi means like a gentleman or nobleman or something kind of like that. So bushi is one way to read this, but the more native Japanese way of reading it is mono no fu, which means a warrior, okay? So in imposing warrior, a stalwart warrior, a crazy warrior, but in a good way, okay? So Yuyushiki Mononofu, and then he is the subject of the sentence, whoever this warrior is. Even though normally in modern Japanese we would have a wa or a ga that follows this, that denotes that this is the subject of the sentence, but it's classical Japanese, so we're not going to put that in there if we don't want to. You just have to know that everything that comes after this is in relation to this warrior, okay? So Yuyushiki Mononofu, this imposing warrior, Joga no Gake, okay? Joga, I think it's Jogaku. Jogaku, okay? The mountain or the Jogaku of Gake, the cliffs. So the Gake means cliff. So the cliffs of Jogaku, okay? And that's all one unit of word. That's all one word, essentially. The cliffs of Jogaku. And then we have this particle o, which, again, if you've seen the previous videos, you know how important this o is. O denotes the object of a sentence. Now, what is an object of a sentence? So an object of a sentence is the part of the sentence that receives the action that happens. So pretty much every sentence is made up of a subject and object. Well, actually, usually it's a subject and a verb. But in Japanese, sometimes, or occasionally you have a subject, an object, and a verb. So the subject is the thing that does the action, okay? So like if we have in English, dog eats food. The subject is the dog because the dog is doing the eating. But the food is the object of the sentence because it is the food that receives the action of being eaten, of the eating, okay? The food is what's eaten, the dog is what does the eaten. Therefore, the dog is the subject, the food is the object, and the eat is the verb, is the action, okay? So the cliffs of Jogaku for here are what receives the action, and the action is noborite, okay, from the root verb noboru, which means to climb. However, noboru is the final form, the ending form, but we want to put it in nobori, which is a connection, right? So you can add other stuff on there. And then we have this te, which is a particle that denotes further connection. I believe the difference between just nobori and then going on with the sentence as opposed to nobori te and then going on with the sentence is te is a little bit stronger. It's more like this happened and then X, Y, and Z happened. Whatever came after happened. So it's got a little bit more of a time-sensitive thing, a temporal causation. Those are some big words. I didn't know I knew these big words. But if you have the te, it's this happened and then this thing happened in order of that. As opposed to if you just have nobori, it's like, oh, climbing happened and then other things happened too, but not necessarily one right after the other. The order is not that important. We're just going to continue on. But anyway, so we have an imposing warrior, Yuyushiki Mononofu, climbed the cliffs of Jogaku, and that's one way to think of te as an and, okay? So climb the cliffs of Jogaku and... Okay. Honora, okay? Honora means flames, again, which we've seen. And normally, again, there should be, if in modern Japanese, there would be a wa or a ga here denoting that honora is the subject. Again, the honora is the thing that's doing the action. Tsutsumu, right here, tsutsumishi, comes from the root verb tsutsumu, which means to wrap around, to cover. Another way of reading this kanji is idaku, which means to like embrace, to wrap around, right? To hug. However, so it's in this case, it means envelop, right? However, we go from tsutsumu, which is the final form, the ending form, to tsutsumi, which is a connection. So then we can add this shi on here, right? Now, this shi is very important, but it's a little bit weird. It's probably one of the weirdest of the helping verbs, okay? Because its root form, its ending form is ki. And it is a past tense thing. It's very much like that keri that we just saw a little bit earlier, or rather when we saw it was keru. But it means a past tense, and it kind of has a little bit of a recollective aspect to it. However, the ki is the ending form. So that's how you would end the sentence. So honora tsutsumi ki. And then that would be the end of the sentence if we were going to use it that way. However, we put it in the attributive form, because attributive form is everywhere. So from ki, it goes to shi. So tsutsumi shi. And then this right here, this next kanji is iwa o, which is a big boulder. And it's just a noun, so there's nothing that we really have to do there. So honora tsutsumi shi iwa o. Okay, which means flames enveloped past tense, a boulder. So a boulder that flames had enveloped is one way to translate this. And then o, okay? Again, so the flames that enveloped the boulder is receiving the action, which by implication is going to be this warrior over here. So this boulder that is enveloped in flames is receiving the action, and the action is mi izuru from the root verb. Well, there's technically two verbs here. First one is miru, which means to see. However, instead of miru, we go to mi, so then we can add the izuru onto it, which means to go out, okay? Now, I'm going to see if I can remember how to explain this. So miru and go out. So go out and see. When you combine those two together, the best way to translate it is to find, okay? So find. Okay, so mi izuru. So to translate this part here, so he climbed a mountain and then he found a boulder enveloped in flames. Okay? So moving on. Okay, interesting. So first, kanji, yaiba, which means blade. If you guys are familiar with Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba, literally what that means is blade of demon destruction. So yaiba, and then we have this particle de, which technically is a combination of two particles, ni, te, but what happened is over time the ni and ni te eventually fell off, so we had n, de, n, te, and then we have n that already automatically puts your mouth in a voiced position to voice the next thing that comes. So n, te became n, te, de, okay? So yaiba de, and what de means is by means of or with. And not with as in like together with, but like using, whatever. So yaiba nite, yaiba de, honora. So, and then again, we're just not going to put the, we're not going to use the particles here because you're just supposed to know. So honora is actually the subject of this next little clause here. Because honora, furarureba, comes from the root verb furu. I think that's what it is. Fureru, modern Japanese fureru, but classical Japanese fureru, okay? Which means to touch. Now, the interesting thing here is I believe classical Japanese would be furu. I would have to double check that, and if I'm wrong, somebody can go ahead and correct me in the comments there. Again, modern Japanese is fureru. In classical Japanese, it would be furu, is my guess. But to touch. However, we are switching this up from furu into the furaru, which means the passive voice. So now what is passive, okay? Passive tense. So if we take the previous example, dog eats food in English, right? Dog eats food. If we wanted to turn that passive, the passive voice would be the food is eaten by the dog. So essentially the meaning of the sentence stays the same, but it's making the thing that is having action done to it the subject, and the thing that is doing the action the object, essentially. So the food is eaten by the dog. And the reason why you want to do this, I mean, there are many reasons. Sometimes you want to say this idea, but you want the focus to be on the thing that is receiving the action, and therefore that's why you do it. There are other ways of doing it. A lot of times it's a lot less direct. It's a lot more indirect, and so it's good for shifting blame. I mean, there are plenty of reasons. We do it all the time. If you want to know more, you can either think about it or you can even look it up, but I'm not going to dwell on it too much here. But suffice to say that we are doing the passive of furu, which means to touch. So furaru means to be touched, okay? And then we have furaru, and then we have de, which is the connective form, right? We've seen that previously with, what did we do? Tsutsumi, right, is one of the things that we did. I can't remember what some of the other examples are, but in this instance, the connective form is furaru de, and then we have this ba on here, right? Ooh, actually, this is izenke, so it's not quite the connective form. It's a different kind of form that we conjugate it here, so we can put this ba onto it, and this ba denotes condition, okay? What that means, condition. Now, in this instance, when you conjugate it this way, the condition is directly causal, okay? Which means that the best way to translate this would be when or because, okay? So when X happened or because X happened, then the following Y happened as well, or happens as well. Or when X happens, Y happens. Or because X happens, Y then happens, okay? So, to bring this all together. So, with his blade, Honora, the flames, were touched when, or because. So, to translate this a little bit better, so when the flames were touched with his blade, by his blade, moving on. Ooh, okay. So Honora is the flames. Wa denotes that it is the subject of this sentence, but I believe the way it works, if you want the like overarching main part of the sentence, you don't stick a particle on the end of there. However, when you have different clauses that kind of have to follow their own thing where they have to have a little bit of subject like we see here, then you want to stick the wa on there so that you know that even though in this clause it's kind of acting as the subject, it is still relating back to that main point. So that's why we have honora wa, and if you study modern Japanese, you're going to be very familiar with this wa. This wa is everywhere. It is the subject marker of a sentence, okay? I guess technically it's a topic marker, but we won't get into that. And then so honora wa, so the flames, and then hagane. Hagane means steel. So the steel in relation to the sword. So when he touched the flame, so when the flames were touched by his blade, the steel or the flames with the steel, and then normally there would be an o here, I would assume, but again, we're just going to imply it. We don't need to explicitly state it. You should just know because of how the sentence is panning out. And then here we have this tsutsumu again. Okay, tsutsumu, to envelop, right? Like the flames were enveloping the boulder. Tsutsu, however, instead of tsutsumi or tsutsumu, lastly we had tsutsumi, and then the ending form is tsutsumu. However, we have it in tsutsume. And the reason why we have it in me is because we're sticking this domo on the end of it, okay? Now, this domo means despite, in spite of, or contrary to what one might expect, contrary to. Because the flames, or another way of translating would be even though. So, even though the flames enveloped the steel, okay? Onogami, so onoga comes from the root noun onore, which means oneself, okay? Myself. It's sometimes used in terms of it kind of is a replacement for I, but it's not quite I, because a lot of times, depending on how it's used, it can mean either I or you, which is a little confusing, but it means oneself. However, in this instance, because we're talking third person, the best way to translate this would be him or his. Now, onore is the root noun. However, with some of these pronouns that they have in classical Japanese, what you would do is you have ware, nare, onore, kare, and that just is the pronoun, right? So, ware is I, nare is you, kare is he, she, it, third person, right? So first person, second person, third person, roughly speaking. Onore is another self. It's most closely related with first person, but it's not quite first person. Actually, technically, none of these are first, second, third, but we won't get into that. Just for the sake of the argument, ware is first, nare is second, kare is third, onore is first, okay? However, if you want to denote my, right? So ware is I, but then you want to say my, instead of saying ware no, which is what a lot of people would do in modern Japanese. That's how you do it in modern Japanese. You say wa ga. You take the de off and you put the ga on, okay? So ono de becomes ono ga, which means belonging to oneself. In this case, since it is a third person sentence, we're talking third person, we're talking about his, okay? And what is his? What is the thing that we're referring to that's his? His me, okay? Me means the body, his physical form, his personage, okay? So, onogami, his personage, wa, and again, there's that wa again because we have a second clause here that functions like a mini sentence. However, again, we are denoting that it's relating back to that bigger thing, which is the warrior. We're still talking about the warrior. So, onogami wa, so his personage, koto. Now, koto is another noun that is a bit rough to translate. However, it means thing or event or situation almost. But the way we use it here is one of the things here is, or let's back up. So koto means thing, but it means thing as in an intangible thing. Again, like a situation or an event or a happening or a thought, an idea. This one is kind of hard to explain, but when you see it in combination with this following adjective, nash, although there's a mo in between there, although you don't need to worry too much about the mo, but that just means even. So even koto, so even the thing, nashi. Nashi is an adjective, technically. That means non-existent, doesn't exist, not there. So onogami, so his person, koto, thing, mo, nash. So even a thing was not there in regards to his personage. Is probably the most literal way I can translate that, which may not make a whole lot of sense, but what it means, so if you have koto nashi, koto mo nashi, koto ga nashi, okay, that means that no harm happened, no bad thing happened. For some reason, when you have koto nashi, you assume that it is in reference to a bad situation. So, to translate this whole thing, so even though the flames enveloped his steel, his personage, his body, his physical being had no problems. Nothing happened to him, okay? Nothing happened to his physical body. So he touched his blade to the fire. It wrapped around his sword. However, he had no harm. There was no harm done to him. Okay. Anji dashitaru. Okay. So this first word here, anji, comes from the root. Well, it comes from the root noun, technically, an, which is a Chinese loanword. It means to think, to consider, okay? And then technically, if you want to add it, if you want to make it into a verb, so a thought or a consideration, and then you have the zu, you have anzu, that means to think or to consider. However, we don't want it anzu because we want to add this idashitaru onto it, so we put it in the connective form, the an. So anzu becomes anji, so we can add this idasu, okay? Idasu, which means to go out. Anji idashi, and then dasu. Okay, so anji idasu is the ending form, but then we turn it to shi, so then we can add this taru on the end of it, okay? So to consider, to think, and to go out. So you can think of this, the ideas. He comes up with an idea, and then the idea comes out of his head or out of his person and into the world, so he makes it a reality. So you can think of anji dasu as to create something new, to think of a new idea and to bring it to fruition, right? However, we have anji dasu, and then we put it into shi, so we can add the taru, and the taru means past tense / continuation. So in English, you can either translate it as thought up. So if we do anji idasu means to think up. If we have idash taru, it can either be thought up, as in past tense, or thinking up, okay? The ing or the ed, okay? Past tense or continuation. So anji idash taru. Now again, this is in the attributive form. The ending form of taru is tari, okay? So if it was at the end of a sentence, it would be tari, or should be tari. However, we are putting it in the attributive form because we are describing the sono waza, okay? Sono means that, and waza means skill, technique, ability, right? So, anji dashitaru sono waza. So, that skill that he created, that skill that he made, that he thought up, so the skill that he created is receiving the action, and the verb, the actual action, isn't going to come till the end of the sentence. So just keep that in mind, that this is going to be receiving the action. And then honora, which means flames, except it's written with a different kanji now, no tsurugi. So there's that no again, that means of, and tsurugi means sword. So the flame of sword. But in English, if we want to translate to English, we've got to flip it around. So the sword of flames, okay? To. And then to is a quotation, okay? This is very important. This one's a little bit hard to translate, but it's a quotation. So if you want to say to read a thing, or to read that, to think that, to say that, notice how all of those are like quotations, right? So I read that rabbits are adorable. I don't know. Or I think that tigers are cool, right? In this case, the to here is kind of like the that. I say that Hawaiian pizza is delicious. Don't at me. Okay? So, hono no tsurugi, so the sword of flame to nazuketari. So, this kanji here, na means name. And zuketari, so it comes from the root verb tsuku, which means to stick onto, right? To attach to. So, name, stick onto, or rather stick a name onto, okay? So to name something is what nazuku is how you would say it in classical Japanese, modern Japanese nazukeru. However, we go from nazuku to nazuke, so then we can add this tari on the end of it, which we just explained that taru is the same as tari, except taru is the attributive form. Tari is the ending form because we are ending the sentence, okay? So nazuke tari, which means past tense / continuation. So either naming the sword or naming the skill, the sword of flame, or named the skill, the sword of flame. The sword of flame. Okay. So to go over this, so the skill that he thought up, or that skill that he thought up, he named the sword of flames. Okay, moving on.
岩王のかけらを切り出して渡りたるはからの国。
Okay. So iwao, there's the big boulder. No kakera. So these two kanji together mean kakera, which means a shard or a piece of. So a piece of iwao, so a piece of the boulder. O, meaning that the piece of the boulder is receiving the action, and the action is kiri idashite. Kiru, or kiri, comes from root verb kiru. However, we're putting it in the continuation, the connective form. So kiru goes to kiri, and then idashite to go out. So he's cutting off. He's cutting and taking out a fragment of this boulder. And again, we have from kiri idasu, goes from kiri idashi, so we can add the te there, so which again is connective, and it denotes like temporal or a temporal sequence, I guess you could say, a time sequence. So he did X and then blah blah blah. So he cut off a chunk of this boulder, and watari taruwa. So wataru, or watari, comes from root verb wataru, which means to cross over to. Okay. And then we have from wataru to watari, so we can add the taru on there, so it makes it past tense. Most of this is going to be past tense, even though it's not necessarily always past tense. However, watari taru, however, notice that it's not in di, it's in ru, so it's supposed to be attributing, giving attributes to a noun. But if you notice, there's no noun here. The noun is implied. So in this instance, the noun should be something like place. So watari taru tokoro, place, or watari taru toki even, or so when, the time. And then we have the wa, again referring that this watari taru tokoro, so this place that he went to, that he crossed over to. And then we have the wa, denoting that this is the it is the subject of this clause that then relates back to the overarching subject of the whole thing, which is the warrior. And then we have kara no kuni. So kara means mainland or China in classical Japanese. Mostly China, but sometimes it is used to refer to Korea. And then no means of, and then kuni means the country. So the country of China, or the country of the mainland, okay? So to what's the word? To recap, so iwao no kakera o kiridashite. So he, again, we don't need to say he because we're still talking about the warrior, right? So he cut off a shard, a fragment of the boulder, and this is the te, and the country he crossed over to was the country of China. Okay, moving on.
これいずこより来たるかと僧侶博士に尋ねたり。
Okay, so kore means this. So now he's got this fragment, right? And he's like this thing, kore. And then again, normally you would want to put like what is it? What is that called? What is that called? A particle. Normally you'd want a wa or a ga here. And then we have izuko, these two kanji together. This first one means in modern Japanese is nani, and the second one is tokoro. So what place? And then you combine them together and you have izuko, is classic for where is what it means. In modern Japanese, we say doko, but in classical Japanese, it's izuko. So, and then we have the particle yori, which is actually very similar to a particle we saw earlier, which is kara. Yori denotes, again, a place of origin and a thing that comes out of that place of origin, right? So, izuko yori, the best way to translate yori is from in English, okay? So, this, where from, kuru. So, kuru, the root verb is ku, which means to come, right? In modern Japanese, we say kuru, but the classical Japanese, the ending form, the base form is ku, okay? However, we have it in this attributive form because, and I'm not entirely sure why they do this, but when you put something in a question in classical Japanese, a lot of times you put it in the attributive form. I'm sure there's an explanation for it. I don't know why they do that a lot of the times, but they do that. So, and that's what kuru is. The ending form of ku is ku, and then the attributive form is kuru. And then we have this particle ka, okay? Ka means a question. Like in modern Japanese, if you want to ask a question, like if you want to ask somebody, are you going to the park? Anata wa koen ni ikimasu ka? And that ka takes a sentence which is anata wa koen ni ikimasu, which means you go to the park. But anata wa koen ni ikimasu ka makes it, are you going to the park or do you go to the park? So the ka is a question. But so this where from comes question, and then we have that same particle to, that quotational to, right? And what is the to? So we've got this quotation, right? So keep that in mind. So this is the quotation that the warrior is either saying, speaking, writing, or something. We don't know in what way he is giving this quotation out, but we will get to that in just a little bit. So where did this come from? Soro hakase. So these first two kanji, soro means priests, Buddhist priests. And these second two kanji right here, hakase, means like professors or very wise men. What would you say? Gaksha. What's not gaksha? You'd say like scholars, right? So to the monks and scholars, ni, and there's that place marker. Again, there's that particle that's a place marker that means like at, in, on, or in this case, to would be the best place. So, or to the scholars, tazune tari. So here is the verb that refers to what that explains how he is quoting this idea, right? So it comes from the classical Japanese verb tazunu, modern Japanese tazuneru, right? Which means to ask, to question, right? So tazune, and then we have it from tazunu to tazune, so we can add this tari, which we've been over the tari. It means past tense in this instance. So where did this come from? He asked the priests and the scholars, the priests and the professors, okay? So he takes this shard, this shard of the rock, and he goes over to China, which, you know, back in ancient Japan, right? China was always the big boy on the block. So Japan was always this itty-bitty little teeny tiny country that, you know, they had some really great culture, but like all of the smartest, the wisest, the most powerful people resided in China. Like the relationship is, you can think of it like what Rome was to the British Isles in Europe, China was to Japan in most of history, right? Everybody thought China was where it was at. China was the big boy. China had all of the fanciest stuff. It had the smartest people. It had the most learning. So this warrior took a chunk of this rock, went over to China, and began asking all of the priests and the professors and stuff, trying to figure out what it is. Where did it come from?
旅を続けていくとせか、またも炎の落ちぬれば。
Okay, so tabi means travel. So his travel, his trip. And then o, meaning that the trip is receiving the action, which is tsuzukete, okay? Comes from the root verb tsuzuku, which means to continue. So he continued. However, we go from tsuzuku to tsuzukete, so we can add it into the, again, that temporal, he continued his trip and iku toseka. Now, this is interesting that they read it iku toseka, because I feel like they should say iku tsukika, because iku means unknown number of, okay? A questioning number of. So several in this instance is the best way to translate it. And tsuki here means moon, but more abstractly it means month, right? In fact, I think that's where we get the root verb for, or the root word for our word for month comes from moon. Moon, month, okay? And then there's that ka again, which denotes, uncertainty. It's questioning. We don't know. So, tabi o tsuzukete ikutsuki ka, or ikutose ka, which, again, I find it interesting because if they wanted to say ikutose, because tose is for years, okay? But they have tsuki written here. So I think this is a little bit of a typo, I guess you could say, because this means several months, but what the narrator says was several years, okay? So he continued his travels for several months, and then mata mo. So mata means again or more. I think again is the best time, so mata mo, so even again. So mata mo together means like once more, again. Okay, honora, flames, no. Now this no is a little bit different from the no's that we've seen. This no is the subject marker particle, okay? So it's kind of like the wa that we've seen multiple times, or a lot of times, again, they just leave the no off. However, the difference between no and wa or ga, wa, again, as far as I can tell, is like denoting the subject of a sentence that's a part of a bigger overarching structure, right? However, no is like denotes the big part of the sentence, okay? It denotes the big part of the sentence, but the difference between no and ga, no, from what I understand, is a little more poetic. I don't know if it's quite emphatic, but it's a little nicer, it's a little cleaner to hear, according to them. As far as I'm aware, I could be wrong about that, but... So once more, the flames, ochi nureba. So again, there's otsu, goes to ochi, so we can add this nu on the end of it. And nu denotes completion. It denotes that a thing is done and then it's over, right? That it happened and it's over, it's done. So it's not really continuing. It happened and However, what we do is we put nu, we go from ochi nu to ochi nure, so then we can add this ba, and we've seen that ba again, which denotes when or because. So, after continuing his trip for several months or years, once more flames fell, or because flames once more fell. And then we're not done with the sentence, so when flames once more fell...
もののふ民に恐るるなかれと説き聞かす。
Okay. Moronofu, so this warrior, who is the subject, he's the guy doing this thing. Tami ni, so and there's that ni, so tami means people, the people in general. And then ni, so to them, to the people. Osoruru nakare, so osoruru comes from the root verb osoru, which means to fear. And then osoruru is in the passive form. Now, the interesting thing about classical Japanese in the passive form, so we've seen it in one instance, earlier, where it is X is done as opposed to X does, right? So X is done, yeah, X is done as opposed to something, or Y does X. So X is done by Y is passive, but Y does X is active, okay? So this is in the passive. However, this passive isn't quite the same as the passive that we saw earlier. In this instance, passive denotes kind of like a natural coming about of a thing. So when these people, these people see this fire falling from the sky, of course they are naturally going to be freaked out by it. They're going to be like, oh my gosh. And we have it in osoruru, which there is an implied noun here because osoruru is the... what is that? Is the attributive form. So osoruru, and then there should be like a koto. So a thing of naturally being afraid is the most literal way to translate it. And then he has it from osoruru koto. So the thing of being afraid, nakare, comes from which we've seen this before, comes from the root adjective nashi, which means to not exist, okay? To not be. Now, we go from nashi to nakare. And the way this works is technically what's going on here is we have nashi becomes naku, because ku is the way you connect adjectives to things that come after it, right? So nashi goes to naku, so to not be, and are, which, if you remember, comes from the root verb ari, which means to exist. Okay? So it might be confusing because nashi means to not exist, and then are means to exist. So naku are. However, ari is being ended in are, and that is a command form. Okay? So he is telling them to do something. Okay? So osoruru nakare. So osoruru nashi. So the thing of fear be, or the thing of fear not exist, be. So he's saying, do not be afraid. So after getting through the whole literal translation, the more technical translation is, do not be afraid. And then we have the to again. To, quotational, because that's what he is saying to them. However, they don't just say that he just says that, because that's a little boring. So instead what they say that he says is, toki kikasu. So toki comes from the root verb toku, which means to unravel, but more abstractly, it means to explain. Because when you unravel a hard problem, right, you explain it. And then we have kikasu, which comes from the root verb kiku, which means to hear. However, we turn it from kiku to kika, so we can add this su on the end of it, which makes it causal, I think is causative. Is that what it is? But it means to have, let, or make somebody do a thing, right? And so we have kiku, which means to hear, and then kikasu is to have somebody hear, to make somebody hear. So it's a little bit of a more fancy way of saying to say a thing, to have it heard, to have people hear. So to summarize, the warrior to the people, do not be afraid, explained and made them hear. Okay? So he told them to not be afraid. Oh, explained to them to not be afraid.
炎の剣は天よりの授かり物と信ずれば。
Okay. Honora no. So the flames, no, and there's the subject marker, no, that we saw previously. So denoting that this is the subject. Tsurugi, so, hold on. Strike that. It is not the subject marker. I was getting ahead of myself. So Honora no tsurugi. Okay. So the sword of flames, which is his special technique, right? Where he sets the sword on fire. Honora no tsurugi wa. So again, this is the subject of this little clause here, which is denoting that we're still referring to this warrior guy. So the sword of flame wa ten yori no. So ten again is heaven, yori, so from heaven, no, and this is the of. This is possession. So it is of from heaven. So the sword of flame is of from heaven. So in this instance, you could just say from heaven. However, there's a little bit of a discrepancy, a nuance here that exists in Japanese that is kind of hard to explain in English. But that's what it is. So ten yori no sazukari mono. Okay. So this sazukari comes from the root verb sazukaru. Okay. Which means to give unto. And we have sazukaru to sazukari, so then we can attach this mono, which means a thing, but it means a physical thing. So sazukari mono, the best way to translate this is a gift. So honora no tsurugi wa ten yori no sazukari mono. So the sword of flame is a gift from heaven. To, and again, there's that quotation. So we're talking about this warrior guy and what he is quoting, essentially. Shinzureba. So this shin right here is a Chinese loan word that means to trust or to believe. And then we have shin goes to shinzu, which turns it from a noun. So shin means trust or faith. And shinzu means to trust or to believe. And then shinzureba, so we have it with the reba that we've seen there. So when or because. So the sword of flame is a gift from heaven, quotation, because he believed. Okay, because he believed, or when he believed, because, and I think because in this instance is the best way to translate it. So because he believed that the sword of flame was a gift from heaven. Okay, mononofu, so the warrior. So because he believed that it was a gift from heaven, mononofu, so this guy, kore means this, okay? And it is in reference, it is referring to the skill of the sword of flame. Kore o, so the sword of flame o, again, meaning that it is receiving the action and the action that comes after it. これを隠さず. So from the root verb 隠す, which means to hide. And then we have it in 隠さ, so we can add this zu on the end of it. And this zu is negation, so to not do a thing. So to hide, not. So Mononofu, the warrior, これを隠さず, so without hiding it, okay? Nozomu mono. So nozomu means to desire, to want. However, it's in the attributive form because it is attributing the mono, which means person, okay? So person that desires. Nozomu mono ni. So to one that desires, to a person that desires, tsutaeri. So it comes tsutaeru, or tsutao is the root verb, which means to pass on to relay to. However, we go from tsutao to tsutae, so we can add this di on the end of it, and this tsutaeri is kind of like the taru that we've seen before, the tari that we've seen, in that it's like past tense, but also continuation. So it can either be ing or ed. So he relayed or passed on to those who desired without hiding. Okay, and then we have it in the di instead of the do because the sentence is now over. So he passed on the sword of flame technique to anybody who wanted it without hiding, without keeping it from anybody. Okay, so shi, this first kanji is shi. It's a Chinese loanword that means master. It means the teacher, the master. And then we have kara, so which again we've seen before, which means from. So from master, deshi, these two kanji right here is another Chinese loanword that means disciple or student, pupil. And then e right here is a particle that means to. So from the master to the disciple. To, there's that quotational. And the reason why it's quotational is because we have tsutaerare, which we just saw, tsutou, right, which means to relay. So relay to, or relay from master to disciple, and tsutaerare, okay, which is passive. So we go from tsutau to tsutaeraru. However, we go from tsutaeraru to tsutaerare, which means that we're not done with the sentence. It's a continuative thing. But if you notice, we don't have the te, because it's not quite as solidly defined as this happened, then this, okay? Because lots of people learned this at different times and in different places, and maybe later in time people learned it, but in general it was taught, or it was relayed, because that's what the passive here means, is that it was passed on. So from master to disciple, it was passed on, and again, we're not going to say what it is because we don't need to, it's already implied. So from master to disciple was relayed, was passed on. Tada. So, and tada right here means only. Only if we want to abstract it a little bit, it's kind of like a regrettable thing. It's like however, it's like only. So it's like it was passed on from master to student, except only Moko is these two kanji right here. Moko means the Mongols. Okay, it's a Chinese loanword. Moko nomi. Okay, so only the Mongols. So tada moko nomi. So again, that's what you all combine that, and it's emphasizing that it's like, however, the Mongols waza o tsugi. However, only the Mongols, waza is the technique, o meaning that the technique is what's receiving the action, and the action is tsugi, which is to, again, another way of saying pass on, to continue down through the bloodline or down through the lineage, right? However, again, we put it in the tsugi because instead of tsugu, because the root verb is tsugu, we have a tsugi because we're not done with the sentence. So it's just one clause into another clause. So the technique was passed on from master to disciple. However, the Mongols are the only ones who now pass it on, who now have received it or continue it. All right, and then Tsushima, which is the name of the island in the game, the name of the place. No means of, and then we have Tami again, the people. So the people of Tsushima. Nade, okay? Now, nade technically means to like pat or to pet, right? It's actually a very soft word or a very soft thing that you do. However, when you combine it with giri, right, kiri, which means to slay, I mean, I think the root original meaning is to cut, but when you cut somebody, you slay them, right? So, nade giri. And then we have from nade giri or nade giru, which means to slay, to do, to kill them, to cut them down, right? And nade giri ni. Now, this ni again is the direction / place marker. So it means to. So, to the slaying of the people of Tsushima. So, or actually, instead of saying to, I think for the slaying, for the purpose of, in order to. So, in order to slay the people of, or for the purpose of slaying the people of Tsushima. I think, is that the end? Nope. されど、噂の聞こえるは、上岳山の頂で. Okay, so されど. So from the root, I think it's a verb technically, saru, which means is such a way, is that way. Okay, this is actually where we get the modern Japanese so from, because saru became sa-u, which became so. Okay, so it means that or in that way. But instead of saru, we have sare, so we can add this do, which means despite or however. So sare do literally just means however. So however, in spite of that, despite that. Uwasa means rumors, no, and this no is a, again, it denotes the subject of a sentence. So rumors no kikoyuru wa. So it comes from the root verb kiku, which means to hear, which we went over. And then kikoyuru, which means to be heard. Okay, so kiku, to, which is active. Kikoyuru, which means passive. So those who hear about, and again, technically it's in kiko because the root verb is kikoyu. However, we have kikoyuru, which is a attributive form, which means that there is supposed to be a noun here, but there's not a noun here because, again, classical Japanese, we're just not going to say the noun if we can get away with it. So those, and after probably the best thing would be kikoyuru mono, kikoyuru hito, which means person. So those who hear the rumors, wa, meaning that they're the ones who do the action, because again, well, I'm not going to get into that relationship. Anyway, Jogaku Yama. So Jogaku is the mountain. So Jogaku Yama, Yama means mountain. So the mountain of Jogaku no itadaki de. So the itadaki means summit. So the summit of the Jogaku mountain de, which means by means of, or again, at in this case. So at the summit, or by means of the summit of the mountain of Jogaku. So, actually, let's go over the whole thing. So, however, those who hear the rumors at the summit of Jogaku. Okay. Honora wa. So, there's the flames, and they're the ones who are doing the action, which is materi, which is root verb matsu, which means to wait. And we saw this conjugation before, so we go from matsu to mate, and then into materi, which means that this little itty-bitty thing right here is a full sentence, okay? So the flames wait, or are waiting. So again, up until this point, all of the tarus and the eddies that we've conjugated have all been past tense. However, now we have switched it over into the continuation. So the flames wait. So the flames wait. And then yusha kitaram. So yusha is a Chinese loanword that means a brave person, a warrior, stalwart person, right? And then kitaram comes from the root verb ku, which again we went over, which means to come. And then we have it ki, so we can add the taru, which again we've seen. Now, this is technically it's the taru, but in this instance, because it's so common, because taru eventually has been added to ku, or ki rather, so often that ku and kitaru basically mean the same thing. Ku and kitari basically mean the same thing. However, as a final conjugation, we go from kitari to kitara, so we can add this on the end of it, and the denotes either uncertainty or volition, okay? So the flames wait, and a brave person shall come, or may come. Or if we're speaking about this, and this is one of the things about Japanese, is because a lot of it is ambiguous, because we leave so much off that a lot of it is left up to interpretation. So it's either the flames wait not knowing or wondering if maybe in the future somebody, a brave man, will come, or the brave man is thinking, I will come, I will go to there, I will go there, and he is denoting volition. So this kitaram, this adam, right, denotes either volition, as in I do it, I will go, it is my intention to do this, or it denotes uncertainty, meaning may or maybe, we're not sure. And I think that is actually the end of it. Yes. So let's go back over, review the whole thing just one final time. Okay, Aru Toshi ni, so 1 year, some year, we don't know. So, when flames fell from heaven atop the summit of Mount Jogaku, a stupendous warrior climbed the cliffs of Jogaku and found a boulder wreathed in flames. When the flames were touched by his blade, the flames covered his steel, covered his sword. However, despite flames covering his steel, his personage, he himself, was not harmed. That technique that he thought up, or that he came up with, he named the Sword of Flame. He cut off a fragment of the boulder and then crossed over to China. He asked the priests and the professors and the scholars where this came from. So after continuing his travels for many months or many years, several years, once more flames, or because flames once more fell, the warrior explained to the people, do not be afraid. Because he believed that the Sword of Flame was a gift from heaven. The warrior, without holding back, without hiding from anybody, taught this to anybody who desired. So from master to student, it was passed on until only the Mongols received it for the purpose of slaying the people of Tsushima. However, those who hear the rumors at the summit of Mount Jogaku, the flames are waiting, and a warrior, a brave person, will come. That a brave person may come. Okay, that one was a bit long, but that's it. That is the last and the final mythic tale that we have here with Ghost of Tsushima. Is very good. I hope these were educational for you. However, do not think that we are done with this series of explaining classical Japanese, because there are many instances in games and some in anime, although I'm not as familiar with the anime side of things, but there are many instances in games where classical Japanese is included, and I want to go over some of those. And quite frankly, because a lot of them are going to be a lot shorter, I'm going to be able to make a little bit more well edited videos, and I'm actually very excited for the next one that should be coming up. So keep in touch, keep your eyes peeled for that. So please subscribe to the channel if you've got a chance. And if you did find this educational or entertaining, please give the video a like as well. Please share with your friends who are into Ghost of Tsushima, or maybe who are into learning Japanese. I've tried to make this as accessible to people who are not familiar with modern Japanese, although because it is such an esoteric idea, it might be a little hard. But if you've watched all the way up to here, I thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart. Ito katejike no koso haberi kere. And hopefully we will see you for the next explanation of classical Japanese in games, which I am really excited for. However, it will demonstrate just how much of a weeb I actually am. But thank you very much. We'll catch you later. Have a good one, guys.